Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Bytes Software Services SQL 2012 licensing webinar. Just to introduce myself, my name is Chris Swani. I head up the Public Sector Division of Bytes Software Services, and I'm going to take you through these changes that are going to be happening fairly soon. Just a brief overview of some of the webinar. So this is just an overview of the forthcoming changes to the SQL Server in advance of when it's going to be released next year. You are muted on this webinar, but you can submit questions at any time. So there is a questions box on the right-hand side of your screen. Just type your question there. What we will do is we will come back to those questions at the end of the webinar. So throughout the webinar, type your questions away, and what we'll do is we'll attempt to answer them at the end. We'll also give you a couple of minutes after I've finished speaking on the webinar, just to give you time to have a think about some questions that you may wish to ask. We are recording this webinar, and post the event we will put it onto our website, and we'll send you all a link so that you can actually view it with your colleagues afterwards. But can you also please complete the critique form that we will be sending at the end? We do a number of these sessions, and it's very, very important for you to feed back to us on how relevant you found it, how you found the presentation, how you found the formatting of it. We do take this feedback very, very seriously, and it helps us construct future events for you. On the critique form, there's also a couple of action points as well. I'm sure your account managers will be in touch with you anyway, but if you actually specifically want them to contact you sooner rather than later, then if you can indicate that the relevant question on the critique form. And also if you'd like to find out about any of the alternative licensing schemes that are available, if you could indicate that as well. For any other inquiries, there's an email address there, so kylie.stent@bytes.co.uk. You can email Kylie. She'll pass on your questions and your comments to either myself or to your account manager. So the agenda for this session, we're going to try and keep it to about half an hour. May run over a little bit, but I'm going to give you first just a basic summary headline fact of what the changes are around SQL Server 2012. It's not going to be a technical session about all the functionality of the various new editions that are coming out of SQL 2012. But what I am going to do is show you a couple of slides so you can just get a flavour for the different editions that there are. What I'm going to concentrate most on is the licensing models and how the licensing model to purchase SQL Server 2012 is changing, how that's going to affect virtualization and mobility. I'm going to give you an insight into some of the pricing as well. Now, naturally, pricing could change month by month with Microsoft, but this will give you an indication of how much stuff could be costing you. There's also going to be a migration to SQL 2012 in relation to the licensing model, and this is particularly important if you've got software assurance on any of your licensing agreements. And yes, I'm going to go into the licensing agreements as well. I'm conscious that the audience here are from a range of different organizations, so you will all be purchasing under a multitude of different licensing agreements. So I'll touch on a couple of the key agreements for you. And finally, what next? What should you be looking out for next? So, just to summarize the key changes, firstly, the product lineup is changing, and the next slide takes you through that. There is going to be a new business intelligence edition as well. A key change is that licensing is going to be done by processor core instead of processors. So I'm going to go into detail about how that's going to affect you and how editions are going to be licensed with that model. With Enterprise Edition at the moment, you can purchase it on a server cal basis, so that licensing method is actually ending. And I'm going to take you through briefly how that's going to affect things. Unfortunately, there's going to be a price increase on client access licenses, so I'll let you know what that is. And also there's going to be expanded virtualization rights with software assurance. Now this is only going to be a high-level overview to introduce the changes to you. There's more than likely going to be a lot more information coming out over the coming months in advance of the actual release of SQL Server 2012. But if you're going to benefit most from the changes, I really do encourage you to engage with your Bytes account manager. They've been fully briefed and trained on the changes. They answer questions every day about this sort of thing. So they are the experts. So do engage with your Bytes account manager, and they'll be able to assist you and how these changes can be applied to your particular environment. So what's the edition lineup? Let's first have a look at SQL 2008. At the moment, you could call them the main editions, and these are the editions that we're really going to concentrate on for SQL 2008 and SQL 2012. There's lots of other editions as well, so the other editions for SQL 2008, the Small Business Edition, Workgroup, Web and Developer and Express editions. But we're going to concentrate on what's happening around Datacenter, Enterprise and Standard editions. So that's SQL 2008, and that is how it is today. SQL 2012, as we can see, there is a change in the main editions. So Datacenter edition is no longer going to be available. There is now the premium edition of SQL 2012 is Enterprise edition, and that actually includes all of the functionality that was previously included in Datacenter edition. So the functionality of Enterprise edition is expanding. There is also the Business Intelligence edition, and Standard edition is staying as well. What we can also see around the other editions is that Small Business Edition and Workgroup Edition for SQL 2012 are no longer going to be available. There is still going to be the Web Edition, however that is going to be licensed by service providers using the service provider licensing agreements. There's also going to be a Developer Edition, and happy to say the free Express Edition is still going to be available. As for the actual anticipated release date, we expect it to be released around about March to May 2012. So nothing set in stone, but use that as a guideline. And that is going to be one of the sort of the deadlines for you to do some stuff. There's also going to be another deadline for you to look at how you're going to be licensing SQL 2012 Enterprise Edition if you want to continue with the server CAL model for that. And there's a deadline there to purchase licenses up to 30th of June 2012. But I'm going to touch on that a little bit later. Looking at the main editions, here's how the three main editions compare. So we've still got the Standard edition, and that's for your departmental database, small businesses, etc. And also it's going to include business intelligence functionality, but to a more limited level than the Business Intelligence edition. Now, the Business Intelligence Edition includes all the functionality that is included in Standard Edition. But it has that Business Intelligence functionality, corporate and scalable reporting and analytics, as well as Power View and Power Pivot to enable your self-service and analytics. We perceive that Business Intelligence Edition is really going to be very well aligned for those organizations who want to use the business intelligence functionalities around SharePoint. And I'm going to come on to the licensing, how Business Intelligence Edition is going to be licensed as well, and how that complements SharePoint. Finally, the premium edition of SQL 2012 is the Enterprise Edition. Now, this does include all the functionality of Business Intelligence Edition and also Standard Edition. But this is where you've got your mission critical and tier 1 applications, where you're looking at data warehousing requirements. The other important thing about SQL 2012 is how it's aligned to not only your own internal data centers, but to service provider data centers and also to the cloud. Microsoft have increased the functionality around SQL 2012 to make a more seamless transition between on-premise, off-premise and cloud computing. And also Enterprise Edition is really for those large centralized or external facing business intelligence requirements. If you want to know a little bit more about what actually each one includes, here's a basic list for you. I'm not going to go too much into this, but this information is naturally going to be available on the recording, but there's lots of information that your account manager can send you about how technically the three editions stack up against one another. As we do with Bytes, we always look closely at the licensing model. So here is how SQL Server 2008 Revision 2 is licensed. We've got the three main editions, and as you can see, all three main editions are currently licensed by processor. What we can also do is with Enterprise and Standard Edition, we license that on a server CAL basis as well. The important thing is if you've got perpetual license rights to SQL 2008 R2, you're still going to keep those perpetual license rights with those licensing models even after the release of the new version of SQL Server. So what you've got perpetually and how you use that, that's not really going to change at all. The key change is actually if you want to migrate over to SQL 2012, or you need to buy new licenses for SQL Server. So as SQL Server 2012 comes in, we lose the Datacenter edition, and the first change we see is that the Enterprise edition is only licensed by processor core. So server CAL route for Enterprise edition is no longer available. However, what I'm going to do is a little bit later, I'll take you through how you can sort of maintain those legacy deployments. The Business Intelligence Edition is not available by processor core. This is only available by the server and CAL route. Now, the reason for this is that Microsoft perceives there's going to be a good alignment between the Business Intelligence Edition and the use of the business intelligence functionalities of SharePoint. So therefore, SharePoint is licensed by server core as well, by server and CAL as well, and therefore you have the similar licensing scenario for business intelligence. If you want to license the business intelligence functionality, license business intelligence via processor core, then I recommend you look at the Enterprise Edition. And finally, Standard Edition, that is licensed as it has been previously by processor core or by the server CAL method. I'm going to go delve into the pricing a little bit later, but just as an introduction, processor cores are going to be priced at a quarter of the cost that a SQL Server 2008 R2 processor license is today. So basically, if you're buying a processor licenses for a quad-core processor today for Enterprise Edition, we shouldn't see any change on the pricing. Just to introduce to you how licensing of processor cores is going to happen. Firstly, you license all the physical cores on your hardware, and this is if you're going to be in a physical environment. So you license all of the physical cores in all of the processors on your hardware. Irrespective of the number of processor cores that your individual processors have, there is a licensing minimum of 4 core licenses per physical processor. So, just to highlight this, here in the diagram we have a processor with 1 physical core. If you're going to license that by core moving forward, you will need to purchase 4 core licenses. If you've got a processor with a dual core processor, again, you will need to license 4 core licenses. The same goes with a quad-core processor. You'll need to license 4 core licenses. As we move up, though, here we have a processor with 6 physical cores. So here we would normally, today, we would buy a processor license for this. But once SQL 2012 is released, you will need to purchase 6 processor cores. So in the instances where the number of processor cores is in excess of 4, we will see that you'll actually be paying more for your processing power. I'll take you through a couple of licensing scenarios on this just to see where the pricing highlights change. In this first example, we have a server with 2 processors in, and each of those processors has 2 cores. So here, we need to license both of those processors with 4 cores per processor, because 4 cores is the licensing minimum. Therefore, we would need to purchase 8 cores. Previously, we would need to purchase 2 processor licenses, but actually this is going to work out to be exactly the same price for you, so you're not going to see any price increase with this scenario. The next scenario is the processor now has 2 processors, but each processor is a quad-core processor. So we need to license both of those processors with 4 cores per processor. So again, like the previous scenario, you still need to purchase 8 cores, exactly the same price as you're purchasing today. So there's no change there for you. In this final scenario, the server has 2 processors, but each of those processors now has 6 cores. So you need to license both of those processors with 6 cores per processor, and therefore you'd need to purchase 12 cores. That will be a slight price increase over what you're paying today, because at the moment you just buy 2 processor licenses. With that scenario, you're going to have to purchase 12 core licenses. We also need to consider if SQL is running in a physical environment or on a virtual environment. With physical server licensing, again as stated previously, you need to license all physical cores on the hardware. You also need to license a minimum of 4 core licenses per processor, but also take into fact that if you're licensing SQL Enterprise Edition with software assurance on your physical processors, on your physical cores, this will give you unlimited virtualization, and I'm going to go into more virtualization licensing shortly. As far as virtual environments, you need to license the virtual cores. Again, there is a licensing minimum of 4 core licenses per virtual machine. And also license mobility is available with software assurance, and there is a change there to the licensing metric which I'll take you through very, very shortly. Just as a couple of examples here, we have a physical server running multiple environments of SQL, and this server has 4 physical quad-core processors, and we're running multiple virtual environments on that. So in this instance, purchasing of 16 core licenses for SQL Enterprise Edition with software assurance, that will license that server for unlimited virtualization of SQL 2012. In the next example, we're going to look at the virtual machine licensing. So we're just going to concentrate on those virtual machines that you see. Here we have 2 virtual machines, and we've assigned 2 processor cores to each virtual machine. Because there is that licensing minimum of 4 core licenses per virtual machine, to license this scenario we would need 8 core licenses. If you need more information about how this is going to apply into your specific environment, then I do encourage you to speak to your Bytes account manager. I've also mentioned about license mobility. Now, in SQL 2008 R2, license mobility was not granted for Standard Edition. Also, for SQL 2008 R2, to have license mobility for Enterprise or Datacenter editions, you did not need to buy software assurance. However, this is changing. So, SQL licenses with active software assurance moving forward from SQL 2012, license mobility is granted to move virtual machines between physical devices to hosting partners and the cloud. Without software assurance, though, licenses will remain fixed to the physical device. And licenses remaining fixed to the physical device causes a problem if virtual machines are moving within the data center and also moving to service providers and to the cloud. So it's going to be really important if you want that license mobility for SQL 2012 moving forward, or you're going to be purchasing new licenses to cover previous deployments, software assurance is going to be key if you're running SQL in the virtual environments. So, moving on to pricing. I've already mentioned that cores are priced at 1/4 the cost of a SQL 2008 R2 processor license. What I've got here, I've put a price up, and your prices may vary from this depending on the way that you purchase your licenses. And I've used the pricing from a recent Microsoft Open license agreement, so it's giving a standard level of discount. However, if you have an enterprise agreement, a select agreement, or an EAP, the Enrollment for Application Platform agreement, which I'll come on to a little bit later, then you may be receiving much higher discounts. Again, if you want to check the discount level that you're on, the licensing agreement that you're on, do check with your Bytes account manager, and they'll be able to take you through it and have a sense check that you're on the right agreement. So in this scenario, the SQL 2008 R2 processor license, the enterprise license processor, is £21,500. Therefore, when it comes down to SQL 2012, a core license is going to be £5,388.60, 1/4 of the cost of the processor license. So therefore, if you've got processors with 1 to 4 cores, you're not going to see any difference in price. Also needs to be reiterated that actually the functionality of Enterprise Edition is going up because it's including all the functionality of the Datacenter Edition as it is today. I mentioned earlier that SQL client access licenses are increasing as well, so they're going to be increasing by about 27%. So today, if a SQL 2008 R2 client license costs £128.39, on the release of SQL 2012, there's going to be an immediate price increase to about £163.05. If you've got SQL client licenses licensed through an enterprise type agreement, then actually your pricing will remain fixed throughout the term of that agreement. So you won't see any price increase throughout the term of your agreement. Next section I'm going to take you through is how do we actually migrate to the SQL 2012 licensing model. This is going to be particularly relevant if you have software assurance. If you don't have software assurance, so you've bought the licenses that you have at the moment, then actually the main key issue for you is buying your licensing moving forward. Because once you start buying SQL Server 2012 licenses, new licenses, even if you're going to be downgrading those to previous versions, then the rules of those new licenses do take effect. Okay, so it's something you need to start to be aware of, how you're actually purchasing your SQL licensing at the moment. So I'm going to take you through migrating from processor licensing to core-based licensing. I'm going to take you through what's happening about SQL Server Datacenter. There's going to be a conversion, if you have software assurance, from processor licenses to core licenses, and there's going to be a license grant given to you. Also, the Enterprise Edition Server Cal licensing method is ending. So, once SQL Server 2012 becomes available, processor licenses will not be available. You will not be able to buy processor licenses. However, if you do have an enterprise agreement or an enrollment for the application platform, where you've got those processor licenses already in your agreement, then those are fixed in your agreement, fixed at the price, and you can continue to acquire further processor licenses right up to the end of your agreement. If you don't have one of those types of agreement, so you're purchasing on the open scheme or select agreement, then as soon as SQL 2012 is available, you'll need to start purchasing core licenses instead of processor licenses. For customers with software assurance, processors can be upgraded to SQL 2012. So whether you've got a select agreement or any other types of agreement, and you've got an enterprise processor license with software assurance, as long as the software assurance is active at the time SQL 2012 is available, then you can have the entitlement to run SQL 2012 in a processor-based environment. At the end of your agreement, though, you're going to be granted some core licenses. And there's going to be an inventory process. So you need to look at the number of cores that are supporting your SQL environment and report those to Microsoft. If you're going to renew software assurance, although you had processor licenses, you'll be given a grant of core licenses. I'm going to take you through how that's going to work in the next couple of slides. Your renewal of software assurance will be core licenses. The important thing is if you've got standard or enterprise processor licenses at the moment or data center, a minimum of 4 core licenses will be granted per standard or enterprise edition processor licenses. I've got some examples coming up later on around this. So here, one processor gives you 4 licenses. I mentioned that SQL Datacenter Edition is retiring. So SQL 2012 Enterprise Edition provides access to all of SQL 2008 R2 data center features. So we're not losing the functionality, it's just that product is not being carried forward to SQL 2012. Again, as previously, if you've got software assurance that is going to be active towards at the time of release of SQL 2012, you'll need to do an inventory of the number of cores in use at the end of the agreement, and you'll be granted some core licenses. Again, if you're going to renew the software assurance, you'll be renewing core licenses. Data center processor licenses, because they're considerably more expensive than enterprise, are going to be eligible for a higher minimum exchange rate of 8 core licenses per processor. So therefore, if you've got one data center processor license at the moment, you're going to be given a minimum of 8 core licenses per processor. So how does this actually work? Processor license with software assurance will be granted into cores. Minimum 4 for standard enterprise and minimum of 8 for data center. So some example here. If you've got a processor with 1 physical core, you're going to be granted for enterprise or standard edition 4 core licenses. For that one processor, 4 core licenses, even though that processor has only got the 1 processor core in it. Processor with 2 physical cores, you'll still be granted 4 core licenses. And similarly, the processor with 4 physical cores, you're going to get 4 core licenses. The reason there is that there is that licensing minimum of 4 core licenses per processor. So you're not going to lose out at all in the conversion rate when you come to renew your software assurance. However, what if you're running a processor with more than 4? So here you've actually got a processor license with 6 core licenses. Even though a core license is priced at 1/4 of the cost of a processor license, Microsoft are going to grant you the number of cores that you're actually using. So you're not going, if you've got software assurance and you're going to do this processor core conversion, you're not going to lose out on any entitlement. So you've got 6 core licenses granted to you. If you've got 8 physical cores, then you're going to be granted 8 core licenses. The important thing to consider here is that when you come to actually do the renewal of software assurance, if you're looking to renew software assurance and you've been granted these core licenses, then you will need to renew the relevant number of core licenses. So instead of renewing 4 core licenses per processor, you'd need to renew however many core licenses are actually in the processors, so 6 or 8 or however many. If you've purchased Datacenter licenses, then there is a minimum of 8 core licenses for Datacenter Edition. So across all of these examples, you're going to be granted 8 core licenses. If your processor has more cores, so 10, 12, 16 cores per processor and in the future, then you'll be granted that number of core licenses. Again, if you need any further information about that and how that's going to actually affect you in your particular scenario, then do speak to your licensing account, your Bytes account manager. Another key change is the fact that SQL Server Enterprise is ending. So this licensing by server cal method. So you're not going to be able to buy server cal method for SQL Server Enterprise. It's only going to be licensed by processor core. But although the release of SQL Server 2012 is going to happen March, April, May time, Microsoft are going to allow you to purchase new Enterprise Edition server licenses up to the end of June 2012. So there's going to be that small window of opportunity for you if you rely on having Enterprise Server in a server cal model. There's going to be a small window of opportunity for you to actually buy some more server licenses if you need them. If you've got an Enterprise Edition, Enterprise Agreement or enrollment for the application platform, you can, and it's got SQL Enterprise Server licenses in there, then you can continue to add new server licenses right up to the end of the agreement, but only again if they're in your agreement. At the end of your agreement, you will always be able to renew software assurance for your Enterprise Server licenses, so you'll still be able to have that renewal. The important thing to realize, though, is that when you buy a license for SQL Server Enterprise Edition 2012 and it's a server license, there is going to be a limit of 20 cores per server. So you just need to be aware that your server does not carry more than 20 cores, otherwise you'll have to migrate over to the per core licensing model. What I'd just like to take you through now is a couple of examples of some licensing agreements and how these can help you. So firstly, there's the Enterprise Agreement. If you don't already have one of these, this is a great way to get software assurance on your estate. So it's a commitment to purchase key desktop products across your entire organization. But what you importantly do is you fix the price and licensing model for those all products included throughout the life of the agreement. It allows you to lower the entry costs with annual purchasing and also annual split payments, and more importantly, software assurance is included. It's also a subscription or a perpetual licensing agreement. Now, for a lot of people, there's going to be interest. We anticipate a lot of interest in the advantages that software assurance actually has on licensing of the SQL estate, because it's going to grant you that unlimited type virtualization as well as license mobility. So software assurance is becoming more and more important when you're looking at SQL Server. The challenge that some people have, though, is that normally you cannot buy software assurance on its own to cover those legacy deployments and those legacy licenses. However, there is the Enrollment for the Application Platform, or EAP. This has although there's lots of stuff you can put into this, it has a particular emphasis on licensing SQL Server and other key applications across the organization. And this is the way that if you've got licenses already and you've got SQL deployments already, you can retrospectively attach software assurance to those licenses and give you that mobility and also the unlimited virtualization. It also gives you the highest level of discounts for SQL Server. It includes software assurance and, like the enterprise agreement, there are subscription or perpetual licensing agreements in place. So, what next? Engage with your Bytes account manager. This has only been a real top-level introduction to some of the changes, just so that you're aware and you can start thinking about how or if this is actually going to affect you and your infrastructure. Engage with the Bytes account manager. They are the experts and they're very keen to help. Microsoft are holding some customer events. We're just waiting for some of the details to come through from these, but they're going to be customer-specific events, and they're going to be held over the next couple of months. I say the Bytes account manager has the details. They're going to be getting the details. So again, speak to your Bytes account manager, and we'll let you know where they're going to be. I'm sure that Microsoft are going to be doing their own publicity around it as well. I do encourage you to investigate other routes to licensing SQL, such as Enterprise Agreement or the Enrollment for Application Platform. And again, your Bytes account manager will be able to help you compare the various options that there are. Keep an eye on the updates from us. We always hold regular webinars every Wednesday. We'll be holding events undoubtedly around this in the future, and we'll be able to provide more and more information as time goes on. So keep an eye on the emails that you get from us. They announce events and stuff that we're doing. Again, engage with your account manager as well, and they may well be able to come down to your location and help you out locally. And finally, if you've got any more questions, then do email Kylie Stent at bytes.co.uk. Right, that's all that I'm going to speak about as far as the presentation is concerned. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to put myself on mute for a couple of minutes. I think there are some questions. So have a think about if you've got any questions that you'd like me to cover off for you. I'll attempt to answer them, but I'll run down through all the questions. If I can't answer them on this particular session over the webinar, what I'll do is I'll get back to you a little bit later. Okay, so I'm just going to put myself on mute, and I'll be back with you in 2 minutes. Hello, we've just had a look at a couple. There's been a couple of questions come through, so we're just running through these now. So I've seen a couple of similar questions, and one from John Watts. So hyperthreading. If quad-core processor supports hyperthreading, does this count as 4 or 8 cores? Ignore the hyperthreading part of it. Just look at the number of physical cores in the processor. So if it supports hyperthreading and there's 2 channels per core, is that 8? No, it's 4 cores. Okay, I'm just going to put myself back on mute again while I just go down the list, so I hope that answers that question. Just more on the hyperthreading issue. Ryan Hardcastle, thank you for your question. Yeah, just count the number of cores. Okay, another question from Adam Crosskey. The question is, if we have SQL 2012 Enterprise Edition licenses for the cores in our virtual machine hosting environment, we do not need to license any of the virtual machine cores at all. So, with 2012 Enterprise Edition licensing by core, if you license all of the cores in the physical machine, then that provides, and also you've got software assurance assigned to that as well, that's another reason for having software assurance, then you do not need to look at the number of cores in the virtual environments. So licensing Enterprise Edition core licenses with software assurance covering all of the cores in a physical machine gives you unlimited virtualization rights across your virtual environments. Alternatively, you can look at individual virtual environments and you can just simply license the number of processor cores in those virtual environments. I hope that answers your question. I'm just going to go on mute again. We're still running down. Another question, Philip George. If you license 6 virtual machines, do you have mobility? Mobility is only granted under SQL 2012 if you have software assurance on your SQL 2012 license. So again, importance of software assurance. If you want mobility, then you'll need to attach software assurance to your licenses. I'm just going to go on mute again. And a question from Oliver Pattenden. If we continue to use SQL 2005 and 2008 for the next few years, will the license model change still apply for standard and Enterprise Edition SQL core licenses? For the licenses that you already have and you have entitlement to today, there's going to be no changes. So you still use those licenses at the entitlement that you had when you bought them. The key comment really though is if you need to put more SQL into your environment, so more SQL 2005 or 2008, the only way you're going to be able to do that in the future once SQL 2012 comes out is by buying SQL 2012 licenses, and as part of the entitlement of those licenses you can downgrade to previous versions. However, you need to take account of the license rules of that license. So yes, for new licenses, there may well be a change as to how you look at your licensing. So you'll need to license it by core. If you want mobility, you'll need to put software assurance on it. If you want unlimited virtualization, you'll need to put software assurance on it as well. Again, I hope that answers your question, but do speak to your Bytes account manager really to get the devil in the detail about your particular environment. I'm going to go on mute again. And another question from Ryan Hardcastle. So, SQL 2012, there is a little change. The question, sorry, is just following up on enterprise with core licensing. If you don't have software assurance, does licensing the physical host give you any virtualization rights at all? So with SQL 2012, if you're going to license the physical host and you want virtualization rights, unlimited virtualization rights, then you will need software assurance on your SQL 2012 licenses. However, if you look at the virtual machines, you can license SQL 2012 and align those licenses to the individual virtual cores assigned to the virtual machines. So you don't apply those licenses to the physical host, you apply them to the virtual machine. Okay. This is a change from SQL 2008 R2 and previous editions down to SQL 2005 R2, whereas previously you didn't need the software assurance when you're looking at the physical host. It automatically gave you the virtualization rights. It's also important to know that once you've got the software assurance on there, you've also got mobility, and that mobility not only extends to your own data center, but it also extends to your service providers if you're using your hosting providers, and also to cloud environments as well. I'm just going to go on mute again. I hope that answered your question, Ryan. And a question, similar question from Andrew Braithwaite, but more around standard editions. So he says, with standard edition in a virtual environment, you cannot license the supporting hardware. With standard edition, you need to license at the virtual core level, okay, not the physical. If you want unlimited virtualization on a device, on a host, then you look at SQL 2012 Enterprise Edition, and you can sort of assign, for Enterprise Edition, you can assign the licenses either at the virtual level or at the physical level. With Standard Edition, very, very similar to the way it's done today, is actually you just look at the virtual cores assigned. I hope that answered your question. Going on mute again. And a good question from Sylvester Sikorsky. After July 2012, if I would like to install SQL Server 2008 R2 Enterprise Edition as Server Cal, would I be able to buy the license? If yes, which one? This is a key change that you really do need to consider. After July or after the end of June 2012, Enterprise Edition licenses, server-based, will no longer be available. If you already own them, then you can continue to run them in the server cal model. So if you're going to still want to have buy new Enterprise Edition server licenses, then you can only buy those up to the end of June 2012. Thereafter you won't be able to do it. If you then wish to continue to deploy Enterprise Edition, you'll need to look at the server cal route. So there may be a look at, okay, forward planning. Do you buy some SQL Server 2012 Enterprise Edition server licenses before the end of June, or do we look to migrate over to a per core processor model? I hope that answered your question, Sylvester. And a question on mobility from Andy Worthington. Do you have license mobility rights if you continue to run 2008 R2 SQL but have software assurance on your licenses, or do you only get this if you upgrade the version? So with SQL 2008 R2, license mobility is only granted with the Enterprise or Datacenter editions. The good thing about the licensing at the moment, though, is that you don't need software assurance on that. Currently, for SQL 2008 R2, there is no mobility for the standard edition license. If you have SQL 2008 R2 licenses post the release of the 2012 version, then you still have mobility rights for those licenses, because those licenses are SQL 2008 R2. However, should you purchase new licenses, and even if you run for SQL 2012, and even if you run SQL 2008 on those new licenses, to get mobility you will need the software assurance. So purchase those licenses with software assurance after the release of SQL. I hope that answered your question, Andy. And a question from Philip George. So, if you have a virtual SQL server with 4 processors, do you only have to have 1 license? With the virtual processor, if you're licensing now by processor, then you would need 4 processor licenses if you've got 4 processors assigned to the virtual server. Moving forward, you need to count, post the release of SQL 2012, you'll need to look at the number of processor cores supporting that virtual infrastructure and license the number of cores accordingly. I hope that answered your question, Philip. And a question from John Watts. Does the licensing still cover any number of instances on the server? So at present, SQL 2008 R2 Enterprise Edition, and this is today, for each SQL 2008 Enterprise Edition license, that allows you to run up to 4 instances or 4 virtual SQL in 4 virtual environments. With Datacenter, if you've got all of your processors licensed with the current Datacenter edition, that allows you to run any number of instances. You don't need software assurance for that at present. However, moving forward with SQL Server 2012, the Enterprise Edition, you need to license that by core because that's the only model going forward. You need to license that with software assurance if you're buying new licenses. And once you've got all of your processor cores and your physical host licensed with SQL 2012 Enterprise Edition with software assurance, that will allow you to run an unlimited amount of SQL Server in your virtual environment on that host. So I hope that answered your question, John. Right, we're just going to give it 2 more minutes just to see if there's any other questions. That's the list of ones we've got. We've had some great questions, and it looks like the feedback on this has been great, so I hope it's been as useful. Your time's been usefully spent. I've just got one question here, Philip George. How much is Oracle? We saw some stats from Microsoft and around this, and naturally Oracle was pitched at much more expensive than Microsoft. Again, it depends on what you're looking to do with the Oracle. Again, Oracle goes down a per core route, and also it depends on the manufacturer of the processor as well in relation to Oracle. So it's a little bit more complex. If you're looking at migrating to Oracle, speak to your Bytes account manager, and they'll be able to take you through it. We also have Oracle specialists as well, who can really give you a great level of detail about the comparisons between Oracle and SQL, etc. So, difficult question to answer. How much is Oracle? Speak to your Bytes account manager. We'll just give it a couple of more minutes as well, just in case there's any more questions. Okay, questions? We don't have any more. Before you start ringing off, can I please ask you and remind you to fill in the critique forms? Like I said before, it's really important that we get those back from you. It helps me know that I've done a good job for you or otherwise, but it also means that we're able to improve and continually improve moving forward. A recording will be made available. We just need to get this back from the service provider, and then we'll post it onto our website. But what we'll do is we'll email everybody with that, with a link to that as well. Or if you have any further questions, do speak to your Bytes account manager or email kylie.stent@bytes.co.uk. And thank you very much for your time and your investment and time in this. I hope it's been useful. Keep an eye out. We're going to do more of this as we go on, and I'll look forward to speaking to you again at some point in the future. Thank you very much.